It was supposed to be a routine departure from Los Angeles International Airport, one of the busiest airports in the world, where hundreds of flights lift off every day without incident, and on this flight, a Delta Airlines Boeing 737 accelerated down the runway smoothly, engines at full takeoff power, passengers unaware that anything unusual was about to happen, until just seconds after liftoff the aircraft was hit by a bird strike, a moment that sounds minor but is anything but harmless. Because at takeoff speed a bird becomes a solid object, and when it is ingested into a jet engine spinning at extreme rotational speed, it can bend fan blades, disrupt airflow, and trigger dangerous engine instability, which is exactly what the pilots saw as engine parameters suddenly spiked. Vibrations increased and warning indications appeared in the cockpit, yet there was no panic, no shouting, only trained discipline as one pilot focused entirely on flying the aircraft while the other immediately began emergency procedures. Understanding that takeoff is the most critical phase of flight where altitude is low, weight is high, and time is limited, making every decision matter, and recognizing the seriousness of the situation, the crew declared an emergency, not because the aircraft was uncontrollable, but because declaring early clears airspace brings fire crews into position and removes hesitation from air traffic control, allowing pilots to manage risk instead of reacting to disaster. While inside the cabin, passengers felt only a brief jolt and an unusual sound but no loss of control, because modern aircraft like the Boeing 737 are designed to safely fly, climb, and return on a single engine if handled correctly. And instead of rushing back to land immediately while heavy with fuel, the crew kept the aircraft airborne to stabilize systems, burn fuel, and prepare for a controlled return, proving once again that aviation safety is not about luck, but about layered engineering, disciplined training, and calm decision-making under pressure, where even when the sky strikes first, preparation ensures it does not win. After the initial shock of the bird strike, the situation inside the cockpit of the Delta Airlines Boeing 737 settled into a tense but controlled rhythm, as the pilots confirmed what the instruments were already telling them, that one engine was damaged, but still producing limited thrust, a dangerous gray zone where an engine is not fully failed yet cannot be trusted, because bird ingestion can cause internal blade deformation that worsens with time, heat, and vibration, so the crew followed memory items exactly as trained, reducing thrust on the affected engine, monitoring exhaust gas temperature and vibration levels, and ensuring the aircraft stayed above minimum safe airspeed, all while climbing away from Los Angeles International Airport and coordinating with air traffic control, who immediately cleared surrounding traffic and gave the crew unrestricted airspace. A critical step, because at this stage the priority is not landing quickly but landing safely, since the aircraft was still heavy with fuel, and a rushed approach could create a worse emergency. So the pilots held the aircraft in a controlled pattern, allowing systems to stabilize and giving themselves time to think, communicate, and prepare, while cabin crew were quietly informed to secure the cabin and prepare passengers without causing panic, because calm cabins lead to controlled outcomes. And throughout this entire phase, the aircraft remained fully flyable on one engine, exactly as it was designed to be, proving that modern jetliners are built with the assumption that engines can and do fail, and that safety depends not on perfection but on preparation. As fire crews positioned themselves along the runway below and emergency services stood ready, not because a crash was expected, but because aviation plans for the worst even when expecting the best. And by the time the crew completed their checklists and reviewed landing performance calculations, they had transformed a sudden airborne crisis into a managed situation, showing that what separates incidents from disasters is not the absence of problems, but the presence of training, discipline, and time, all working together to bring the aircraft and everyone on board safely back to the ground. As the Delta Airlines Boeing 737 turned back toward Los Angeles International Airport, the situation had fully shifted from surprise to strategy, because by now the pilots understood the engine would not recover, and the safest outcome was a single-engine landing executed exactly by the book, which meant slowing the aircraft carefully, configuring flaps in stages to avoid asymmetric thrust issues, and calculating landing distance with one engine inoperative. A process that may look routine from the cabin but is mentally demanding in the cockpit, especially when every vibration and temperature reading is watched closely to ensure the damaged engine does not deteriorate further, while air traffic control cleared the runway and emergency vehicles lined up as a precaution, not as a sign of danger but as standard protocol whenever an aircraft declares an emergency, and inside the cabin passengers were finally informed by the crew in calm, controlled language that there had been a technical issue and the aircraft would be returning shortly. A tone chosen deliberately because fear spreads faster than facts. And as the aircraft descended on final approach, the pilots maintained strict speed discipline, knowing that too slow risks a stall and too fast increases landing stress. And when the wheels finally touched the runway, the landing was firm but controlled, exactly what training calls for in abnormal conditions, followed by reverse thrust from the remaining engine and careful braking as the aircraft slowed safely and exited the runway, ending a situation that had begun with a single bird strike but could have escalated if handled differently, proving once again that aviation safety is not about avoiding every problem, but about managing the ones that inevitably occur. And by the time the aircraft came to a stop surrounded by emergency crews who ultimately were not needed, the flight had quietly transformed from a potential headline into a textbook example of how preparation, procedure, and calm decision-making protect lives at 35,000 feet and at 300 feet alike. After the aircraft was safely parked and the passengers were escorted off without injury, the real story continued on the ground, where maintenance teams began a detailed inspection of the damaged engine on the Delta Airlines Boeing 737, and what they found explained why the pilots had taken the situation so seriously. Because bird strikes do not always destroy an engine instantly, but can cause hidden internal damage to fan blades and compressor stages, damage that worsens if thrust is increased or if the engine is left running too long, which is why aviation procedures are written to assume the worst even when the aircraft appears stable. And as technicians examined the engine, they looked for bent blades, impact marks, vibration evidence, and signs of internal imbalance, all of which can lead to catastrophic failure if ignored. While airport wildlife teams reviewed bird activity around Los Angeles International Airport, using radar tracking, habitat control, and dispersal methods to reduce future risk, because airports are built near open land and water that naturally attract birds, making bird strikes a constant battle rather than a rare anomaly. And aviation regulators such as the Federal Aviation Administration require every bird strike to be documented and analyzed so patterns can be identified and prevention improved, turning each incident into data that protects future flights. And when the investigation was complete, the conclusion was clear and reassuring, that the aircraft had responded exactly as designed, the crew had followed procedures exactly as trained, and the layered safety system had worked end-to-end from engine certification standards to pilot decision-making and emergency response readiness, reminding everyone involved that aviation safety is not about pretending risk does not exist, but about respecting it, preparing for it, and responding correctly when the unexpected happens, which is why this Delta 737 incident ended not as a tragedy but as a quiet demonstration of how modern aviation turns danger into survivable events through discipline, engineering, and experience. By the time the night settled back into routine at Los Angeles International Airport, the Delta Airlines Boeing 737 sat quietly on the ramp, engines cold, passengers safe, and an incident that could have become catastrophic already turning into a case study of how aviation safety truly works. Because this story was never about a bird alone, but about layers of protection doing their job in the exact order they were designed to. From engines built to survive impacts, to aircraft certified to fly on one engine, to pilots trained repeatedly for failures they hope never happen, and procedures that remove emotion from decision-making when seconds matter most, showing that modern aviation does not promise a problem-free sky but promises something more important: the ability to absorb sudden threats and still protect human life. And while headlines may focus on the drama of an emergency declaration, the real achievement is what didn't happen. No panic in the cockpit, no chaos in the cabin, no rushed landing driven by fear, only controlled flying, clear communication, and disciplined execution, proving that safety is not a single action but a chain where every link must hold. And on this night every link did, turning a violent bird strike into a survivable event, and reminding us that when preparation meets pressure, the sky does not decide the outcome, people do.